Right up top, we're diving straight into a really fascinating, kind of tangled web, the psychological evolution of 19th century French working-class militants. These were people who literally dedicated their entire lives to this profound, beautiful vision of social equality. But getting there? Well, their journey was anything but straightforward. We're going to unpack the intense friction between their really lofty, romantic ideals and the gritty, exhausting reality of their everyday lives. To understand them, we actually have to start at the very end for some. This is a genuinely chilling testament from Adolphe Boyer back in 1841. Just look at how this quote frames things. It shows the ultimate lethal toll taken on those who tried to save a world that, quite frankly, fiercely resisted being saved by them. Boyer didn't take his own life because of the physical strain of his job. No. His words tell us he was driven to total despair by a society that punished sincere love and rewarded selfishness. It sets a dark but absolutely essential stage for understanding the early worker apostle. And honestly, this brings us to a massive psychological mystery. I mean, think about it. Why dedicate your entire life, your very meager resources, and your own sanity to a public that repays your devotion with suspicion, mockery, or just blank indifference? What is the engine behind that kind of relentless self-sacrifice? To answer that, we really need to get inside this unique militant mindset.
Let's start with Section 1, the working class apostle.
Okay, it's absolutely crucial that we draw a hard line between top-down bourgeois charity and the bottom-up solidarity of the worker. On the left, you've got traditional philanthropy. This is basically calculated generosity handed down from above, right? It totally expects a return on investment, usually in the form of gratitude or the moral improvement of the poor. But on the right, the egalitarian apostolate is a whole different ballgame. These are solidarities from below. The militant worker is down in the trenches, sharing the daily suffering of his comrades. They aren't waiting around for a polite thank you. They are driven by a burning, absolute principle of equality.
Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like. Take the jeweler Page. He was a founding figure of a communist journal at the time. And look at how this guy operated. He continually took destitute workers right into his own home. He handed out cash advances straight from his own hard-earned wages. He even gave them his own clothes off his back. And here's the kicker. Despite facing terrible recompense, literally zero gratitude, over and over, he just kept doing it. He was completely undeterred. Which leads us perfectly into our next point.
Section 2. The engine of ingratitude. You have to hear about the heartbreaking downfall of Zachary Saint-Urgens. After the 1830 revolution let everybody down, he steps up and organizes the Society of Paris Hosiery Workers to create some unity and mutual aid. Great, right? But look at step 2. He asks the society to help the starving widow of a former member. And the members flat out refuse. They hide behind the rules saying, oh, funds can't be used for individuals. And then, you can't make this up, in step 3, they use those exact same rules to legally expel Saint-Urgens himself while he happens to be in prison. It's a brilliant, if tragic, illustration of what these organizers were up against.
So, what's the takeaway here? For Saint-Urgens, it was a bitter, bitter realization. He learned the hard way that majority rule is not some flawless, magical principle. A lot of the time, the rules and the majority vote are just convenient masks for collective egotism. This taught the early militants a huge lesson. Just getting workers in a room and organizing them wasn't enough. They had to fundamentally change the moral fabric of the workers themselves.
Moving on to Section 3, the Sunday Dreamers.
To cope with the absolute harshness of their Monday to Saturday reality, a lot of these militants adopted a very specific self-image. They viewed themselves as fallen angels. As you can see here, this was a worker who had experienced some childhood revelation, a glimpse of sublime beauty, nature, or poetry, only to have that celestial dream violently shattered by the muck, the noise, and the humiliation of factory labor. Deep down, they felt they belonged to a higher spiritual plane, but they were trapped in this really coarse, unforgiving world. Because of this, they formed what the sources call a secret army of solitaries. Just look at these profiles, they're amazing.
You've got a cobbler trying to find infinite philosophical meaning in the tiny details of making shoes, a wheelwright using his tiny amount of free time to invent traction systems just to alleviate the pain of workhorses, a peddler acting as a roaming peacemaker, hyper-empathetic to all the world's tortures. These guys were solitary nonconformists, literally inventing expansive new philosophies while grinding through the most menial jobs.
So how did this play out on their one day off? Well, on Sundays, friends would take these long, sprawling strolls into nature to escape this city smog and just expand their souls. During one of these trips, they stop at an inn and spot this violently angry butcher. Now look at step 3, because this is the genius part. Instead of preaching down to him from a moral high horse, the apostle matches the exact pitch of the butcher's intense anger. He gets right on his level to understand his furious soul. And by doing that, he actually softens the butcher's animalistic furies, getting the guy to promise he won't be so hellish when he slaughters his sheep. It was grassroots psychological conversion based on deep empathy, not just reading from a manifesto.
But obviously, this sets up a massive, inevitable collision. How in the world could these beautiful, expansive Sunday dreams of universal love and poetry possibly withstand the crushing, mechanical reality of Monday morning?
That brings us to Section 4, the dignity of labor.
To survive, their whole narrative had to drastically pivot. 2 francs. Economists of the era claimed an entire household could survive on just 2 francs a day. Let that sink in. It was a harsh, unforgiving, terrifying economic reality. And that sheer material limitation completely destroyed a lot of those romantic ideals. You can't just wander through the woods debating poetry when your kids are literally starving on a 2-franc budget. So to actually reach the masses, and honestly, just to survive the economic grind, the militant had to completely abandon that persona on the left, the angelic, alienated poet. It was too fragile. Plus, it kind of alienated the very workers they were trying to reach. Instead, they had to champion the guy on the right, the decent worker. This new ideal was sensible, family-oriented, and most importantly, he found honor and nobility in his daily, grueling duties. They had to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were of the people, not above them.
They even started circulating cautionary tales to enforce this culture shift. The story of Charles was a big one. Charles was a worker poet who basically thought he was too good for manual labor. But instead of finding intellectual glory, he got snatched up by the barrier bars on the outskirts of Paris. He ended up desperately seeking applause from the wine-soaked brains of tavern crowds, degraded into a brutal brawl, and died in a hospital covered in blood and dirt. The message was loud and clear. Rejecting honest labor doesn't lead to the heavens, it leads straight to the gutter.
And so, the new rallying cry became a strict, unyielding adherence to work. This quote here, "He who does not want to work should not eat," was proudly slapped right on the front page of the workers' journal Les Ateliers. The militants were now demanding intense moral regeneration and rigid, uncompromising discipline from the workers themselves.
Notice how explicit this new strategy is. The militant mission suddenly aligned itself with traditional family duties. They appealed to the natural care of a father providing for his kids. They bent over backward to prove that reading philosophy at midnight didn't make them a worse mechanic the next day. They aggressively campaigned to destroy the tradition of Lazy Monday, where workers would just skip their shifts to drink. Ultimately, they flipped the script completely. They framed the hardworking laborer not as some downtrodden pariah, but as a proud, chosen race destined to save the world. But, as we know, history rarely ties up that neatly.
Which leads us to our final section, the Monday paradox.
To really cement this pro-work ideal, leaders held up specific individuals as absolute heroes. Take the locksmith Gillen. His friend Corbin praised him to the moon and back with this quote, highlighting that Gillen performed his demanding metal work with absolute dedication and even pleasure. He was the ultimate poster child for the new, disciplined, morally regenerated worker who found supreme dignity in his Monday to Saturday craft.
But here's where it gets incredibly ironic. Corbin follows up all this massive praise of Gillen's work ethic with this dry, revealing little punchline. And if he took off from work on Monday, it was with his books that he spent the many days. Wait, what?
The very champion of weekday labor, the literal poster child for destroying the lazy Monday, was still secretly taking his Mondays off. Sure, he wasn't at the tavern drinking, but he was absolutely escaping the workshop to read his philosophy books.
This hilarious, glaring contradiction eventually leads the author of our source text to just throw up their hands and declare, "These Christians are bigger liars than the last of the Cretans. We must begin again from the beginning." I love this because it perfectly reveals that the tension between our lofty, poetic ideals and the relentless, exhausting grind of daily labor, it's never fully resolved. Even the most hardcore, dedicated advocates for the dignity of labor still desperately needed their Mondays just to dream.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought for this explainer. When we look back at these 19th century militants fighting through ingratitude, crushing poverty, and their own deep contradictions, we kind of have to turn the mirror on ourselves. How do you balance your beautiful Sunday dreams with your Monday reality?